expanded, and the British and the Dutch competed, and the foundation of Singapore, Malaysia happened in a kind of interesting series where first the Portuguese arrived. The Portuguese will found it. The Portuguese in many ways are similar to the Spaniards, and you know them here. They'll found a church. They will start a school. They will Christianize. They will teach morality, religion, and they will organize a hierarchic structure. They won't teach the language to too many people. They will keep it for themselves. They will learn the local language, or they will learn something which we call in linguistics pidgins, or Creoles will develop from that. So the Portuguese came all over the Indian Ocean, the entire coastline of India, and then by about the early 16th century, they reached Malaysia. They founded a fort in a place called Penang. They founded a kind of little settlement in a second place, and finally they encountered the Portuguese presence. So the Portuguese had been there first. The Dutch and the British were trying to get there at the same time. We are speaking of the 16th century. It took a long time for the Portuguese influence to wear out. And it was only by the end of the 18th century that the post in Penang was established by a British officer. It would be a small village. The idea would be simple. First, an Englishman comes in a ship, or 3 ships, 5 ships. They land there, they set up a little palisade, they set up a little something to protect their own property, they repair their ship, they exchange barter for food, and they look for trade options. They either work out peace treaties, or they show their cannon and their guns, and the technology was always a superior advantage, and they're very good at negotiating. So the British created an outpost in Penang, in Malacca, which is further down the coast, the Straits of Malacca. And the geography, I wish I had brought a map, but if you do a Google on any Wikipedia map, you'll get the details. The point to appreciate is that the English colonized India first. The colonization of India became for the British Empire during the entire period of the British Empire, from say the end of the 18th century to 1947, roughly the time you were independent of American rule. So the period is a large one. That period was one in which the wealth that the British got out of India was incredible. Now I quickly come to a second point, jumping a lot of interesting details, to mention how English came into the British colonial system, why Indian authors often write in English. We'll come to how the Americans taught you English and compare the points. The British were divided amongst themselves when they were ruling India about whether to be philanthropic to the people and the populations with whom they were trading. Note the simple point. The Portuguese and Spanish, wherever they were there not just to trade, they were there to rule for as long as possible and to Christianize. The English did not believe in Christianizing. They forbade priests from traveling on East India Company ships. Instead, they said, look, we don't even like the climate. Certainly we don't like the people. We don't have to love your neighbor to trade with him. If you want to be profitable in a trade, you have to negotiate and barter and work out the most advantageous position. So the question was, where does keeping your customer and trading partner happy come in? The East India Company thought in a philanthropic way, hey, we can make them feel happy and safe about us traders if we invest a little money and help in educating them, because their own educating traditions are a bit weird. This was the general European perception. Remember, the Portuguese, when they landed in Malaysia, started the first school in 1524. That's even older than your university here, although you would have had similar things happening here with the Spanish. So it's the same time that all this is happening. Now, what is the thing about the British in India? One faction says there are ancient languages which are the languages of the region: Arabic, Persian, Urdu, Sanskrit. Let's start colleges in which these languages will be studied. That will impress the natives. Another faction said, look at all these buggers. They are primitive, they are stupid. The very fact that we can rule over them means their languages and cultures are not worth much. Let's teach them our language. Let's demonstrate to them the superiority and sophistication of our culture. Now this battle raged on for several decades, and one of the biggest events for all of history I'm saying, even for you in the Philippines, happened when a particular man who was a very good historian and a mediocre poet, a man called Thomas Babington Macaulay, was invited by the Governor General based in Calcutta. This ruled the entire East India Company properties from Egypt to Hong Kong. Remember that it was not like with the Spanish Empire that King Philip or some monarch sitting in Spain rules the territories. The English were traders. You'll remember when Napoleon lost a battle, he said, "I hate losing to a nation of shopkeepers." The British were shopkeepers. They were ruling all this vast expanse from Egypt to Hong Kong through a company of bankers and merchants. The crown got money from it, but the crown took over only in 1857 when the company had a messy time trying to sort out a rebellion that took place in India. Anyway, we won't mention that, but the English language coming to all parts of the world is a very important story, and one man is crucial, and you should never forget the fact the Indian-born novelist living in England, protected by the British Civil Service, Salman Rushdie, has a novel in which he uses the phrase, "We are all Macaulay's bloody Minutemen." Remember that phrase. I have it tattooed on my head, although you can't see it. Because, and what does he mean when he says that? Thomas Babington Macaulay was invited as a very cultured man, a very wise man, to advise the East India Company, what should we do spending money with education for the people we trade with, from whom we make incredible profits. His advice after studying the matter for a year or so was, teach them English. Create a class of people brown in color or white in culture, like coconuts. I mean, he didn't say that. What he said though, I mixed the coconut part with what he did say. He did say they will then be brown in skin, but they will be European, white in culture. Cultural deracination. Systematically creating, what he said, a class of clerks who will help a few administer many. Remember, the population of the Indian subcontinent in the middle of the 19th century would have been about 50 million. How many Englishmen were there ruling this 50 million? Never more than 5,000. Now how could they have done it? Oh, by administration and by creating a whole generation of people who would be taught English. Now what was the result? The result of teaching a lot of Indians English was not just the creation of clerks, administrators of empire at a very minor level, but it created disaffected intellectuals. And nothing is more common than for an intellectual to be disaffected. Intellectuals are people who think a lot, who brood a lot, who don't act physically much, who are very unhappy with circumstances, including their own, who wish to change them but don't have the power to do so. In India, it also created nationalists and patriots who wanted to throw out the British, because they learned through English education that the French had decapitated their entire aristocracy and had liberated themselves. So the motto of the French Revolution was